Hi everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update here on social media. Thanks for joining us this week. A big news week, unfortunately marred by the tragic events in Florida, that school shooting. In addition, we've got some breaking news for you on new Judicial Watch lawsuits about the Russia collusion scandal that you'll be interested in, and details about what Obama may have known and his personal involvement in handling the Russia collusion investigation into Donald Trump, and what he may have known about the Clinton DNC dossier. The questions that Judicial Watch seems to be the only one asking these days. But first up is the big news, unfortunately, about the terrible shooting in Florida this week. 17 individuals killed. And, and to see pictures of those students who were killed, and the adults obviously as well, are just heartrending. What's really upsetting is the knowledge we now have that it probably could have been prevented if the FBI had done its job. Just as I'm coming up here on the video, FBI is admitting that they were warned. They received a tip in January about Mr. Cruz, who is the confessed shooter now, and they didn't do anything. And the bureaucratic response is protocols were not followed. So they had a tip. Now, you may know from news reports, it's all out there, that he had put a comment on a YouTube video saying he wanted to be a school shooter or something like that, and someone appropriately called that in, and the FBI didn't follow up. So those people are dead down in Florida. Those children are dead down in Florida because the FBI didn't do its job. And if this were the only issue with the FBI, you might say, well, there's no fundamental issue here. But this is a fundamental problem that arises again and again with the FBI. We found, for instance, in the Omar Mateen terrorist shooting in Florida in 2016, you may remember this Islamic terrorist went and shot up the Pulse nightclub, killed, I think, 49 people. Now, he had been on the radar, again, of the FBI. And they had actually interviewed him. And Judicial Watch asked questions about how the FBI handled Omar Mateen. And we got some documents from I think from the local law enforcement down there, who talked to the FBI, and the FBI told them Omar Mateen is not a terrorist. And you look in the original document, not, N-O-T, is capitalized. And he was unlikely to go postal. And that was just, I think, 2.5 years before he went and shot up that nightclub and killed all of those poor people. And on top of that, you have the mishandling of the Boston Marathon bombing, where they had information and warnings about the two terrorist brothers who ended up killing those people in Boston, blowing themselves up, setting that bomb off. And you can go all the way back to 9/11, where if the FBI had followed the leads it was given, that 9/11 attack could have been prevented, I'm convinced, as well. And Judicial Watch was heavily involved in exposing what went on there. And in fact, we represented an FBI agent who blew the whistle on the FBI's incompetence and malfeasance there. And then even under Robert Mueller's reign, again, you had Anwar al-Awlaki. And that's a name that you may not be familiar with, but you should, because his name is still being used to recruit terrorists across the internet today. And he was the first American supposedly droned, assassinated using drones. And he was the most important terrorist leader other than Osama bin Laden at the time he was killed, and this is during the Obama administration. But it looks like he was a confidential informant or asset for the FBI here in the United States. This guy, we received documents from the FBI following this terrorist around, and the investigative notes say we followed him all the way up to the Pentagon, and we broke off contact because he was going into the Pentagon to give some, participate in some, moderate Muslim event in the Bush Pentagon, of all places, shortly after 9/11. And Anwar al-Awlaki had likely been involved in 9/11. He knew many of the perps and had hosted them, and it was clear he was involved. But the FBI obviously thought better of reining him in, and so he fled the country and then was behind the Fort Hood shooting, the shoe bomber, and again a massive internet. And he basically created the internet jihad and innovated in using the internet to recruit terrorists for the Islamist cause. And obviously he wasn't working for the FBI at that time, but there was enough to bring him in before then, and the FBI didn't. So what is the FBI for but to protect Americans? And this doesn't mean individual agents are terrible people. We know a lot of these agents. We know the retired folks, and we know from sources individual agents are just great Americans. But the bureaucracy in the FBI is like any other bureaucracy here in Washington, D.C., except all the other bureaucracies in Washington, D.C. are held to account more or less, as much as bureaucracies are. But the FBI we're not allowed to talk about. And on top of that, we've got the corruption at the top levels of the FBI with the Russia hacking, the Russia collusion scandal, the illicit targeting of Donald Trump, the cover-up of the Clinton email scandal. Is it any surprise that when you have the leadership of the FBI spending most of their time figuring out ways to hide documents from the American people, hide documents from Congress, target the President of the United States, and basically just battle any efforts at accountability, that they don't get into the nitty-gritty of making sure that when someone is tipped off in their agency that someone may be shooting up a school, that appropriate steps are taken? There are 17 people dead because the FBI failed to do the job that Americans rightly expect from it. And if the agency doesn't do its job, then why do we have the agency? So we'll be asking questions about this, but Judicial Watch has a long record. We've been suing and battling the FBI in court. I've been here 20 years now. And it doesn't matter the administration, the FBI almost uniformly has been arrogant at the top levels, secretive, and corrupt. So it's a shame that it's brought to the forefront through these tragic deaths in Florida, but I just hope it's not the same old response to FBI incompetence. We're just going to pretend it didn't happen, yell about it a few days, and move on. You know, Mr. Wray was testifying earlier this week, and he spent on the Hill. It was a terrible performance, if you want accountability, because he spends all of his time defending and getting his back up anytime someone criticizes the agency. So there's a lot to answer for here. Like I said, if this was the only instance, there might be the FBI institutionally might have a defense, but there's a real fundamental issue with the way the FBI is being run and its management. And you know, don't ask me. Talk to the retired FBI agents. Talk to the whistleblowers. They all know what's going on. It's really outrageous. And you know, we can't bring these people back, but maybe we can give them accountability. I just hope, you know, the people in Washington, and of course, you know, you're going to get this debate about gun control. We at the FBI have information of a terroristic threat made on the internet, and they didn't do anything about it. And what is the response? Let's have gun control. Boy, oh boy. So, back to the issue that the FBI is purposely focused on, as opposed to basic law enforcement and the jobs they've been hired to do, which is the obstruction of information requests and illegal secrecy that we've been uncovering time and time again at Judicial Watch. We just sued, and the FBI has agreed to process our request for all the Comey records. Now, we found after we sued the FBI for ourselves and the Daily Caller News Foundation and CNN is also involved in the case. I think others are as well. For the Comey memos that the FBI and Justice Department are withholding improperly from us. Unfortunately, the court has ruled initially they can. But they admitted they found the memos in this archive of Comey records that comprise of 16,750 pages of records. So we saw them talk about that in that case, and we said, well, give us those records too. So they said, well, they'll process them for us. And of course, they ignored our request initially, so we had to sue. And then after we sued, we found they gave us this letter saying that we'll process them for a fee, which we're agreeing to move along to get the records. So we want to know about these records, obviously, because Mr. Comey, it's not just about the Russia collusion scandal, it's about the Clinton email scandal and a whole host of other issues that are important to the American people. It's obviously of great historic interest, the records of Mr. Comey, the controversial FBI director, who was fired by President Trump. So the question is now, how quickly will the FBI move to release these records to Judicial Watch? And so we hope that there's a new page that's being turned over at the FBI and they start responding to these records requests in a timely way. And more importantly, they don't withhold information unreasonably. So I just want you to let you know that they're withholding improperly, in my view, the Comey memos, which doesn't augur well for the other documents that we now know are out there. But we want all the Comey records. Now, we know there are some records we can't get if it's classified properly, and I'm sure there are documents we're not going to be able to get. But a lot of documents that are withheld from Judicial Watch and anyone else who requests information under the Freedom of Information Act, you know, they say it's classified or it's law enforcement sensitive or it's deliberative process, and these are all exemptions the government uses to withhold information from you and from Judicial Watch. But almost all of those categories of exemptions, all of those excuses to withhold information are discretionary, meaning it's a political decision. It's not a decision required by law. I mean, if we ask for your Social Security number, the law prohibits the agencies from giving it to us. I mean, that's clear. But if we ask about discussions about the decision to target Donald Trump using a DNC Clinton paid-for dossier that they knew was dodgy, that's a political decision not to release that information to us because they want to cover up their corruption or their conduct that would be subject to controversy. So those are the sorts of fights we're always in with the government here. And we have filed, I think, at least 75 lawsuits against the Trump administration on transparency issues. And I have little doubt the president wants to be transparent on pretty much everything we're asking about. But these agencies are still in deep state mode. And the appointees running the agencies are oblivious to the needs for transparency and the American people's desire for transparency. And in the case of the FBI and Justice Department, they are the absolute worst when it comes to transparency. These are the agencies, the Justice Department, charged with enforcing the Freedom of Information Act. So just so you know, when we ask for FBI documents, we technically sue the Justice Department because the FBI is a subset of the Justice Department. And they're the worst of the worst when it comes to following the law. So along those lines, another terrible agency when it comes to transparency, and it's a more recent development because the agency went south as a result of the Clinton email scandal, is the State Department. Now, we're taking on some big topics with the State Department. Obviously, we've got the Clinton email scandal, that Judicial Watch FOIA litigation against the State Department uncovered. It wasn't Congress, it wasn't the media that uncovered the Clinton email scandal, it was Judicial Watch. It was our legal team, our investigators, that uncovered the Clinton email scandal. Now, with pay-to-play also being uncovered as a result of Judicial Watch's litigation, the Clinton pay-to-play, the State Department was a mess. And it's continued to be a mess because of the Russia dossier revelations, or the Russia scandal revelations that have been uncovered since then, largely and also in part due to Judicial Watch's legal pressure. For instance, we just found a week or two ago and disclosed that there was another Russia dossier the State Department had that they leaked to the Congress to target Donald Trump. And it turns out the State Department was also playing patty cake with the Fusion GPS gang and Sidney Blumenthal, another Clinton crony, and laundered intel, or what they pretended to be intelligence, into State Department official files and back into the FBI. So the State Department continued to be abused even after Hillary Clinton left. And one of the abuses that people are concerned about are the unmaskings. Now, what are unmaskings? You may hear this phrase. An unmasking, as best as I'm able to understand it, is a request from an official for the identity of an American picked up in foreign intelligence gathering. So let's say they're listening in on the British Prime Minister and the German Chancellor talking about an American. And someone, let's say the President, says, oh, what is the name of this American? Because it's important for me to know the context. And that American's name is unmasked. Now, as you might imagine, there are great sensitivities about doing so, because when you're eavesdropping abroad, there are no warrants required. You don't need any permission from a court to spy on foreign nationals abroad. So when Americans get caught up in that spying, it really ought to be, if the intelligence gatherers thought it was important in the context of the intelligence, they would let those who are consumers of the intelligence know the identity necessarily, I would think. But under the Obama administration, it looked like in their efforts to get Trump, they were unmasking at a rate that was well beyond any reasonable requests. So, according to Fox News, Samantha Powers, who was Obama's ambassador to the United Nations, worked at the State Department, had 260 persons unmasked over her last year at the State Department. What on earth would she have done that for? I have no doubt it was to get Trump. No doubt. Now, why did they need to know the identities of 260 persons? Because I'm convinced they were using this foreign intelligence, they knew it was out there, and someone figured out, oh, well, we can just start Googling or doing the search, the equivalent of searching Google searches and intelligence gathering data to find out indirectly what the Trump team was up to. I guarantee you, not for legitimate reasons, but to target Hillary Clinton's presidential candidate opposition and help her. I have little doubt. And of course, this is first unmasked, to use the turn of phrase, by Devin Nunes, the House Intelligence Chairman, the Republican, who bravely came out and exposed this. We still don't have the details on it. So Judicial Watch has asked about specifically the Samantha Powers unmasking. We've gotten the stonewall from this State Department, not the Obama State Department, but the Trump State Department run by Rex Tillerson, who's told us basically to go jump in a lake. They refused to respond to our request about what Samantha Powers was doing to unmask all these people the last year of the Obama administration. We also asked about our communications about the DNC hacking. Remember, the whole theory is that the Russians hacked the DNC servers. I don't necessarily buy that. But we want to know if Powers was involved in figuring out what went on there, because it looks like they were involved in everything else on the Russia collusion dossier laundering operation targeting Trump. And it isn't just the State Department, because now we have information, and we've already known, as long as you don't read the media and do your own analysis, you already know a lot of what I'm telling you. So you probably already know that Obama is as key to figuring out what went on in terms of the illegal and illicit targeting of Donald Trump as any other official. And along those lines, Charles Grassley and I think Lindsey Graham released an email, as I call it, the "We're Not Crooks" email, written by Susan Rice, Obama's corrupt national security advisor, at 12:15 on the day President Trump was inaugurated. I think it was written even after he was sworn in as president. And she wrote this "We're Not Crooks" email that is obviously cover for misconduct by the president, James Comey, Joe Biden, and others. And the letter, and I'm going to read you in large part the email because I think it's important that we get it on the record, because you're not going to hear about this from the major media. Susan Rice wrote this to herself, an email to herself about a meeting that took place on January 5th. She wrote it 2 weeks later. So that's a weird way to memorialize a meeting, don't you think? Well, you'll see why it's such a scam of an email. On January 5th, following a briefing by IC leadership, intelligence community leadership, on Russia hacking during the 2016 presidential election, let me put my glasses on so I can look at it from a distance. President Obama had a brief follow-on conversation with FBI Director Jim Comey and Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates. Remember Sally Yates? In the Oval Office. Vice President Biden and I were also present. President Obama began the conversation by stressing his continued commitment to ensuring that every aspect of this issue is handled by intelligence and law enforcement communities, quote, by the book. The president stressed he's not asking about initiating or instructing anything from a law enforcement perspective. He reiterated that our law enforcement team needs to proceed as it normally would, by the book. Do you believe that? I would read that paragraph to mean, to document the exact opposite, that President Obama was manipulating the process with his cronies, Jim Comey, Sally Yates, Joe Biden, and Susan Rice, as it relates to Russia involvement in our elections, and more specifically, the targeting of President Trump. Because from a national security perspective, the email goes on, however, President Obama said he wants to be sure that as we engage with the incoming team, we are mindful to ascertain if there are any reason that we cannot share information fully as it relates to Russia. The president asked Comey to inform him if anything changes in the next few weeks that should affect how we share classified information with the incoming team. Comey said he would. Why would Rice write that email 2.5 weeks later, but then the cover, there you know what's? Further confirmation that President Obama needs to be investigated about the dossier. Because you can bet, because he was briefed on all things Russia, just as this email admits, that he was briefed on the dossier and its origins. Everyone else in the agency knew what its origins were, who were senior. Why wouldn't Obama have been briefed? His Democratic National Committee paid for it. Why wouldn't he have known? And then he's telling his people not to tell the incoming president intelligence information he has a right to. Obviously because he hated Trump. The whole superstructure of the Russia collusion investigation is so compromised, if it doesn't collapse on its own weight of corruption, then someone needs to step in and bring it down and stop it. When you have Susan Rice, again, as I said, the corrupt Susan Rice, she was lying about unmasking, said it wasn't happening, and then admitted that it was happening. Remember that? She was the Benghazi, putting out the Benghazi lies on behalf of Hillary Clinton and President Obama, blaming it on an internet video when she knew otherwise. Judicial Watch exposed that, not Congress, not the media. Judicial Watch exposed that the White House knew it was a lie, yet they told Susan Rice to go out and say otherwise. And then Judicial Watch exposed that the unmasking materials that are indirectly part of this Russia, well, directly, I think, part of this Russia collusion scandal are over at the Obama Presidential Library. Because we asked about Susan Rice unmasking material to the National Security Council, and they said, go ask the Presidential Library of Barack Obama. He has it all now. So now we've got Susan Rice in a CYA memo implicating the president, then President of the United States, in Watergate manipulation of intelligence gathering and targeting of his successor. So I hope Congress is bringing in all these people to talk about Russia collusion. Steve Bannon was in there last week. Mueller's been interviewing people. Is Congress going to interview President Obama, or at least ask him questions? Joe Biden? I think you know the answer to that. But we're out there asking questions, and that's why we're in court suing time and time again to get access to the information. We want the underlying FISA applications material. These are the warrants used or obtained as a result of using this Clinton DNC dossier. We're asking for the unmasking records. We have this new lawsuit, as I talked to you about, but we also have other lawsuits about that as well. So there's a lot out there going on, and you can see we're committed to getting to the truth, and we call it as we see it. Some people don't like what I have to say about the FBI, or Barack Obama, or transparency with the Justice Department and the FBI under this administration. Contrary, I'm convinced, to the wishes of the White House. But we got to be willing to tell the truth. So, and we're able to do this litigation. You know, I get to come on and talk about all these lawsuits our great lawyers file and all the disclosures uncovered by our investigators analyzing the records and asking for the records and knowing what to ask and who. And those of you who support us allow us to do all this great work. So it's a real honor to be able to do it. And we realize it's a precious right we have here in America to ask these questions of our government and be able to go into court and be on equal footing, more or less, to try to get answers. We often don't get the answers we want, or we have to wait too long, and it's a significant effort to get it. But in many places, none of this would ever be able to take place. So God bless America at the end. So it's a good way to end the program. Thanks for joining us this week, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Be sure to be watching CPAC next week, which is a big event here in town for the conservative movement. Judicial Watch will be heavily involved, and I think we'll be having broadcasting from CPAC next week as well, so be sure to tune in then as well. Thanks for joining us.